They laughed at her simple gray sweater and modest demeanor. The wealthy women mocked her endlessly at Caroline's elegant dinner party. What they didn't know was that this unassuming redhead, with her hair tied in a simple bun, had just sold her furniture company for $750 million. And when the truth came out, their faces were priceless. Ruth Harper tugged gently at the sleeve of her plain cashmere sweater as she stood in the grand entryway of Caroline's magnificent home. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above her, their light reflecting off marble tables decorated with fresh white roses. The soft fragrance of flowers mingled with the expensive perfumes worn by guests. To Ruth, who lived in a modest townhouse, this world felt foreign, almost unreal. "I should have worn something else," she whispered under her breath, smoothing the fabric of her simple black skirt. At 45, Ruth never cared much for luxury, brands, or high fashion. Comfort had always meant more to her than couture. A uniformed server appeared with a tray of champagne. Ruth accepted a glass with a grateful smile. She hadn't seen Caroline since their college days over 2 decades ago. When they reconnected online, Caroline had insisted she come to the dinner party, eager to catch up. "The other guests are already in the dining room," the server informed her. Ruth entered, and the room fell momentarily silent. 6 women dressed head to toe in designer labels looked her over with thinly veiled judgment. Their jewelry glittered, their hair perfectly styled. Every glance was a measurement, every smile edged with superiority. "You must be Caroline's friend," a blonde woman with a pearl necklace said smoothly, her eyes sharp. "Yes, I'm Ruth Harper. Caroline and I were college roommates," Ruth replied politely. "How charming," another woman drawled, her tone making it clear she meant the opposite. "I'm Victoria. Please join us." Ruth took the empty seat at the table set with sparkling china and crystal. She could feel their eyes flicking over her modest clothes, her small handbag, her lack of jewelry. "Caroline mentioned you're in furniture," Victoria said, the word dripping with condescension. "Yes, that's right," Ruth answered calmly, offering nothing more. She had learned long ago that how people reacted to her profession revealed more about them than it did about her. "That must be interesting," another woman chimed in. Her diamond bracelet flashed as she introduced herself as Diane. "My husband just closed a $40 million deal on the East Side." Ruth smiled politely. "That sounds impressive." The women quickly shifted into a lively discussion about real estate, charity galas, designer shopping trips, and exotic vacations. Ruth sipped her champagne quietly, listening. "And what about you, Ruth?" Victoria asked at last, her lips curving into a practiced smile. "What brings you back to town?" "Furniture shopping," Ruth quipped lightly. The women laughed, though not with her. "Actually, I'm here for a few meetings," she explained. She didn't add that those meetings were with her investment advisors about where to channel the hundreds of millions from the sale of her company. "How exciting," Diane said with mock enthusiasm, exchanging an amused glance with Victoria. Ruth remained steady. She had seen this kind of dismissal before. She no longer let it sting. "So tell us," Victoria pressed, leaning forward, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Do you have a little shop somewhere?" Ruth smiled faintly. "I design custom pieces." "How quaint," Victoria replied, her smile razor-sharp. "I think my housekeeper's daughter does something similar. Crafts, right?" Laughter rippled around the table. Ruth stayed composed, sipping her champagne. "It must be difficult," Diane added with false sympathy. "Such a competitive market. My husband always says retail is brutal." "It has its challenges," Ruth admitted. "But surely it's just a hobby," Victoria said sweetly, eyes glinting. Another woman, Bethany, glanced at Ruth's bare hands. "No wedding ring? Never found time for family between all the furniture making?" Ruth set her glass down carefully. "I chose to focus on my business." "Well, we all make choices," Victoria said, her tone dripping with superiority. "Some of us are just fortunate enough to have options." A server arrived with beautifully plated appetizers. Ruth thanked him by name, noticing the flicker of irritation in Victoria's eyes. "These look wonderful," Ruth commented warmly. "Caroline employs the city's most sought-after private chef," Bethany boasted. "Impossible to book unless you know someone." "His restaurant earned a Michelin star within a year," Victoria added, her gaze fixed on Ruth, watching for some sign of envy. Ruth only nodded with quiet appreciation. Little did they know, the woman they mocked for her plain sweater and simple manners had built an empire greater than all their husbands' fortunes combined. And soon, they would learn just who Ruth Harper really was. "The food looks wonderful," Ruth remarked. "I'm curious," Diane said lightly, spearing a scallop with practiced elegance. "What made you go into furniture? It seems such an unusual choice." Before Ruth could reply, Victoria interjected smoothly. "Perhaps it's a family business, something passed down." The implication was clear. Surely Ruth couldn't have chosen such a profession willingly. "Actually, I started from scratch," Ruth explained. "I studied design in college and always had a passion for creating functional art." "Functional art?" Victoria repeated, her tone sour as though the phrase itself offended her. "She means furniture that's both beautiful and practical," Margaret added helpfully. "Yes, I gathered that. Thank you, Margaret," Victoria replied with a tight smile, regaining control of the conversation. Ruth observed quietly. Victoria was clearly the queen bee of this little circle, the others orbiting around her like dutiful satellites. It wasn't so different from corporate boardrooms Ruth had sat in. Only here, the power plays came dressed in pearls and diamonds. "Your sweater looks comfortable," Bethany observed, her gaze lingering on Ruth's simple gray cashmere. "Is that a fashion choice?" "I prefer simplicity," Ruth answered with a slight smile. "Simplicity," Victoria echoed, sharing a glance with Diane. "Well, not everyone can pull off couture. Or afford it," someone else muttered just loud enough to be heard. Laughter rippled softly. Ruth brushed a non-existent crumb from her sleeve, unbothered. Her sweater, understated as it was, had been hand-woven by a master artisan whose work she admired. It had cost more than Victoria's flashy gown. But Ruth saw no need to correct them. "More champagne, Ruth?" Diane offered, eager to move on. "I'm fine, thank you. Perhaps something stronger. You look like you could use it," Victoria teased. Her laugh followed quickly by the others. Ruth caught her reflection in a polished silver candlestick. Her simple bun of red hair, her minimal makeup, her unassuming posture, all deliberately cultivated. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was one of her greatest advantages. Tonight was no different. Dinner unfolded with high society precision. Servers moved like dancers, replacing plates and pouring wine without a sound. Ruth thanked, each one by name, noticing the surprised flicker in their eyes at her sincerity. "Did you see Eliza's new summer home?" Victoria asked, deliberately excluding Ruth from her gaze. 6 bedrooms, infinity pool overlooking the bay. "I heard she paid nearly $12 million, Diane added in a stage whisper. 12.5, Bethany corrected smugly. "My husband's firm handled the transaction." Ruth sliced into her perfectly cooked steak, listening. To these women, value was measured in price tags and square footage. "What about you, Ruth?" Margaret asked suddenly. "Do you have a vacation property?" All eyes turned toward her. They were waiting for either modest embarrassment or an inflated lie. "I have a cabin by a lake," Ruth replied simply. What she didn't say was that the cabin sat on 80 acres of untouched woodland with its own private lake, designed by award-winning architects who had begged for the opportunity. "How rustic," Victoria smirked. "I suppose that makes sense for someone in furniture." "I grew up near the woods," Ruth explained evenly. "I find it peaceful." "Well, not everyone needs luxury," Diane added with false generosity. "Some people are content with simple things." Ruth only smiled. "Exactly." The conversation shifted to charity galas and board positions. Names were dropped like precious stones, each meant to sparkle. "I'm chairing the Children's Hospital benefit this year," Victoria announced proudly. "We're hoping to raise $2 million. A wonderful cause, Ruth said warmly. She didn't mention her own anonymous seven-figure donation to the same hospital the month before. Do you do much charity work, Ruth? Bethany asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Before Ruth could respond, a server approached quietly. Excuse me, Miss Harper. There's a call for you. The gentleman says it's urgent. Ruth nodded. Thank you. I'll take it in the hall. As she rose, Victoria arched an eyebrow. Business emergency with a furniture delivery, she teased, drawing chuckles from the table. Ruth stepped into the hallway and accepted the phone. Ruth Harper speaking. Miss Harper, this is Alan from Westfield Trust. I'm sorry to disturb your evening, but we need your authorization for tomorrow's acquisition, the 8-figure transaction we discussed. Yes, that's fine. Proceed as planned, Ruth answered calmly. Excellent. The paperwork will be ready for your signature at 10 tomorrow. Thank you, Miss Harper. Ruth returned the phone. The young server hesitated, then asked softly, Miss Harper, are you the Ruth Harper who designed the Meridian collection? Surprised, Ruth nodded. Yes, that's me. The server's eyes widened. My mother saved for 3 years to buy one of your coffee tables. She says it's the most beautiful thing she owns. Ruth's smile warmed. That's very kind. What's your mother's name? I'd love to send her something for my new collection. Really? Her name is Grace Martinez. She would be thrilled. There you are, Ruth. Diane's voice cut through the moment as she swept into the hall. We thought you'd escaped through a window. Her eyes flicked dismissively toward the server, who quickly retreated. Just a quick business call, Ruth explained. On a Friday evening? Diane linked her arm through Ruth's, steering her back toward the dining room. My husband never allows business calls during dinner. He says it's a sign of poor management if you can't delegate properly. Ruth said nothing as they returned to the table where dessert was now being served. The women hardly acknowledged her return, already deep in discussion about an upcoming designer showcase. You simply must see Victoria's new collection, Bethany was saying as Ruth settled back into her seat. She's commissioned pieces from all the top designers. Her home looks like a museum. A curated museum, Victoria corrected with a satisfied smile. I can't stand clutter. Everything must have purpose and pedigree. Ruth sampled her dessert, a delicate lemon souffle that melted on her tongue. She noticed the women watching her as though assessing whether she was capable of properly appreciating such refinement. And what's your decorating style, Ruth? Margaret asked. Do you use your own creations? The slight pause made the question sound more like an accusation than genuine curiosity. I keep things simple, Ruth replied, which was true. Her home featured carefully chosen pieces, many crafted by emerging artisans she had supported over the years. I imagine that's economical, Victoria said with a thin smile. Not everyone can afford to redecorate seasonally. I prefer quality over quantity, Ruth responded calmly. Victoria leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Speaking of quality, did I mention my husband just gifted me with a stunning piece for our anniversary? She extended her wrist, revealing an ostentatious diamond bracelet. Custom design. The stones alone are worth more than some people's homes. The women gasped and cooed appropriately, examining the jewelry with exaggerated admiration. Ruth politely admired it when Victoria thrust her wrist toward her. It's lovely, she said simply. Victoria's smile tightened. It's museum quality. Something to pass down through generations. If you have children to pass things to, Diane added, her pointed glance sliding toward Ruth. The implication stung more than Ruth expected. She had chosen her career path deliberately, but these women framed it as a failure rather than a choice. Not everyone's path includes marriage and children, Ruth said quietly. There are many ways to leave a legacy. Victoria laughed, sharp and humorless. Oh, darling, no career compares to family. What's the point of success if you have no one to share it with? The others murmured in agreement. Their wedding, rings glittering under the chandelier. I think success is defined individually, Ruth countered evenly. For some, it's family. For others, it's creating something meaningful. Creating furniture, Victoria repeated, drawing out the word as though it were distasteful. Well, I suppose someone has to do it. The deliberate condescension was like a slap, but Ruth had faced worse in boardrooms dominated by men who believed a woman couldn't possibly understand business. Exactly, Ruth agreed pleasantly. Someone does. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Ruth's unflappable calm frustrated her. She had expected Ruth to crumble or lash out defensively, but neither happened. So Victoria pressed harder. I don't mean to be rude, Victoria said, in a tone that suggested she meant exactly that. But that sweater, is it a hand-me-down? It looks rather worn at the elbows. Ruth glanced down at her sleeve. The sweater was less than a month old, but its muted color and simple design apparently read as cheap to these women. It's comfortable, she replied, refusing to justify her choices. Comfort over style, Diane laughed. How pragmatic. I always say, Victoria added, swirling her wine, you can tell a lot about someone by what they choose to wear. It's a statement about how you value yourself. Ruth met her gaze evenly. I couldn't agree more. Victoria's smile faltered. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps even tears. Instead, she was met with calm defiance. Well, Victoria pressed on, I suppose when you work with your hands, fancy clothes would just get ruined. I'd hardly call it working with her hands, Bethany chimed in, making air quotes. It's more like arts and crafts for grown-ups. Laughter rippled around the table, sharp and excluding. Ruth took a sip of water, silent but composed. Oh, don't look so serious, Ruth, Victoria said, noticing her lack of reaction. We're just having a bit of fun. No need to be sensitive. Ruth set down her glass. I'm not sensitive, I just don't find humor at others' expense particularly amusing. The table fell silent. No one had expected such direct pushback. Before Victoria could respond, the dining room doors opened. All heads turned as Caroline finally entered. She swept into the room with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her black dress elegant yet understated. Unlike the others, her only jewelry was a simple strand of pearls. I'm so sorry I'm late, everyone. The caterer had a mini crisis that needed my attention, she announced, then broke into a warm smile when she spotted Ruth. Ruth, you made it. She hurried over and embraced her warmly, a genuine affection that contrasted sharply with the cool reception Ruth had endured from the others. I've been so looking forward to catching up, Caroline said, sliding into the empty seat beside her. It's been far too long. Victoria cleared her throat delicately. We've been entertaining your friend, Caroline. Such an interesting background she has. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked around the table, clearly sensing the atmosphere. I hope everyone's been making Ruth feel welcome. An awkward silence followed, broken only by Diane's overly bright voice. Of course. We've been fascinated hearing about her little furniture hobby. Caroline's eyebrows shot up. Hobby? She turned to Ruth, clearly confused. Caroline turned to Ruth with a faint frown. Did you not tell them? Ruth only gave a slight shrug. It didn't come up. Tell us what? Victoria asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. Caroline looked around the table in genuine disbelief. You mean none of you recognize Ruth Harper? The Ruth Harper? Blank stares answered her. Caroline laughed softly, shaking her head. Ladies, Ruth isn't just in furniture. She founded Harper Designs, one of the most successful furniture companies in the country. Her work is in museums. Victoria's smile faltered. Harper Designs? The luxury brand? The very same, Caroline confirmed. In fact, Victoria, that console table in your entryway, the one you bragged about last month, that's one of Ruth's designs. Color drained from Victoria's face. But that table cost a fortune. Yes, Caroline said smoothly. Ruth's pieces always do. And speaking of fortunes, she turned back to Ruth with a mischievous grin. Should I tell them, or would you like to? Ruth shook her head slightly, but Caroline forged ahead. Ruth recently sold her company, $750 million, cash deal. It was in all the business papers last month. The silence that followed was deafening. 6 pairs of eyes locked on Ruth, recalculating everything they had assumed about the quiet woman in the gray sweater. 750 million? Bethany whispered, her voice cracking. 752. Ruth corrected softly. But who's counting? Victoria's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. But your clothes, you don't look rich? Ruth finished for her, amusement flickering in her eyes. I never saw the point of flashy displays. I prefer to let my work speak for itself. Diane stared at Ruth's sweater with new intensity. That's not just cashmere, is it? Ruth smiled faintly. Hand-loomed by a Scottish craftsman. He makes only 12 a year. The phone call, Victoria said suddenly, her face paling further. It wasn't about a furniture delivery, was it? Investment portfolio, Ruth confirmed. We're diversifying after the sale. Caroline leaned back, clearly enjoying herself. Did I mention Ruth's philanthropic work? The children's wing at Memorial Hospital. That was her. 20 million. Anonymously, of course. Ruth sighed, reluctant. They needed a new oncology department. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Just minutes earlier, she had been bragging about raising 2 million for a charity gala. But you never said anything, Margaret murmured. Not once, Caroline added pointedly. While some of us were being less than gracious hosts. Ruth only shrugged. I've never felt the need to flaunt success. In business, being underestimated often works to my advantage. Victoria recovered just enough to lift her chin. Well, this is certainly a surprise. Had we known, you'd have treated me differently, Ruth finished for her, which is precisely why I didn't mention it. People reveal their true character when they believe they have nothing to gain from you. The table fell silent as her words settled. The atmosphere shifted. Judgment and condescension replaced by awkward deference. I've always admired entrepreneurs, Victoria said at last, her voice sticky with sudden admiration. The dedication it takes to build something from nothing, it's inspiring. Ruth merely nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting the change in tone. My summer home actually has several Harper pieces, Bethany added quickly. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. I should have recognized your name immediately. You ordered through designers, Ruth said mildly. We've never met. Diane leaned forward, her diamond bracelet flashing. Ruth, I'd love to discuss a collaboration. My husband's developments could use unique furnishings for his model homes. Caroline caught Ruth's eye and raised an eyebrow, a silent echo of their old college camaraderie. Then she spoke smoothly. Ladies, perhaps we should save the business proposals for another time. This is supposed to be a social evening. Still, Victoria was unwilling to let the moment slip away. She raised her glass. A toast to Ruth and her remarkable success. We should all be so fortunate. The others quickly echoed, glasses lifted high. Ruth raised hers politely but didn't drink. Success, she said simply, means different things to different people. But surely, Victoria pressed, unable to resist, the financial reward must be gratifying. After all those years of making furniture. The last words still carried the faintest trace of disdain. Ruth sat, her glass down without a sound. The money was never the point, Ruth said softly. I started designing furniture because I loved creating pieces that would become part of people's lives. Tables families would gather around, chairs where someone might curl up with a favorite book. She paused, her voice steady. The fortune that followed was secondary. How refreshingly humble, Diane remarked, though her tone betrayed disbelief. Ruth smiled faintly. Not humble, just honest. Some of my happiest days were spent in my first workshop, with sawdust in my hair and not a penny to my name. The women exchanged uncertain glances, struggling to comprehend valuing experiences over wealth. Well, Margaret said brightly, eager to break the tension. Now you can enjoy the best of both worlds. All that money and the freedom to do whatever you want. Ruth nodded. Yes, freedom is the true luxury. The freedom to choose how I spend my time, And with whom? Her gaze swept the table, and the implication was unmistakable. Sensing the shift in atmosphere, Caroline stood. Why don't we move to the sitting room for coffee? Ruth, I'd love to hear more about that educational foundation you mentioned. As they moved, Ruth found herself beside Victoria, who was clearly trying to recover ground. I feel I should apologize for my earlier comments, Victoria said in a low voice. Had I known who you were— That's exactly the problem, Ruth interrupted gently. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with courtesy. Victoria flushed. I didn't mean to suggest. Yes, you did, Ruth replied calmly, though her tone carried steel. You implied that wealth and status determine respect. That's a disappointing way to live, Victoria faltered, left speechless, while Ruth continued into the sitting room where the others were already gathered, their demeanor now noticeably different, attentive, deferential. The foundation? Caroline prompted, eager to shift the conversation. Tell everyone about it. Ruth's expression softened, warmth replacing her earlier reserve. We're creating opportunities for young people passionate about craftsmanship and design, full scholarships, apprenticeships with master artisans, business training. How charitable, Victoria remarked, her voice smooth again. It's not charity, Ruth corrected firmly. It's an investment in talent that might otherwise be overlooked. Her eyes rested on Victoria, rather like I was this evening. Silence followed, thick with unspoken recognition. Later, as the evening ended, Ruth stood with Caroline on the porch, waiting for her car. Caroline handed her a light wrap. I'm sorry about tonight, she said softly. I didn't expect them to behave that way. Don't apologize, Ruth said with a small smile. It was illuminating. Caroline sighed. The way they changed once they knew your success, it was grotesque. Money doesn't change who we are, Ruth said, looking out over the manicured gardens. It only amplifies what's already there. And you? Caroline asked. Has your fortune changed you? Ruth considered. I don't think so. I still value the same things: honesty, creativity, and treating people with dignity, regardless of what they can give me. Her car pulled up, a modest sedan far from the luxury vehicles her wealth could buy. That's why you'll always be rich in ways they can't understand, Caroline said, embracing her friend. As Ruth drove away, she reflected on the evening. Those women had all the things society glorified: status, luxury, connections. Yet they seemed desperately unhappy, always comparing, competing, scrambling for position. True wealth, Ruth knew, wasn't measured in money or possessions. It was found in purpose and integrity, in the courage to remain authentic even when dismissed by others. Tonight reminded her why she had always chosen substance over appearance, compassion over competition, and the quiet satisfaction of staying true to herself over the shallow applause of society. What truly matters isn't what we own, but who we are when no one is watching. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Remember, true worth is never in a bank account, but in the lives we impact and the kindness we leave behind.